My next guest is a regular, one of the smartest people, male or female, out there on the planet. She travels all over the world giving advice to people with huge money. So she also produces this, the Solari Report at Solari.com. If you've already figured out, it's Catherine Austin Fitts. Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Greg, it's great to be with you.
You got a deep career. I mean, you're at housing, you're Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. I think you had a $300 billion bond portfolio. You understand big money, big numbers. You were sued. You understand the deep state. You understand the evil of parts of the government. They tried to off you, kill you, bankrupt you. I just want to get that out. I mean, this is just we're just glossing over the surface.
I had 11 years of fun with the deep state.
Yes, you did, and you won. Actually, you didn't. You didn't knuckle under.
I did win. It is a miracle.
You did not. You didn't knuckle under. But anyway, so I'm just trying to give people why are we talking to her? Well, this is why, because you understand it, you get it. I will start with what Rob Kirby said. And it was just an epiphany for me. I mean, I knew it, but when he put it all together in one sentence, I was like, because I said, Rob, a lot of people got this wrong. A lot of people got this whole deal wrong with, the timing of this, the collapse. You said it would be a slow burn. You said that for a long time. You were right. And he said, I said, Paul Craig Roberts, Assistant Treasury Secretary, smart people, good people, smart
very
people.
Very smart, very honest, capable, very smart.
Honest people. Honest people, not selling anything. And he says, well, now we know how they did it. They printed, this $21 trillion, that's at least. And he says, they printed more money than anybody can wrap their heads around to keep this thing going. Now we know how they did it.
Right.
How much longer can this go on? A lot of people are thinking that, we got a big down day in the market on Friday or down day in the market. We had a down week. Monday and Tuesday was awful. We had Thanksgiving. We had a little bounce on Wednesday. You've been calling for a correction in the markets. How long can they keep this game going, before they have to have a new currency? We're never intended to pay any of this stuff back. How long can they keep this going?
So our problem as investors is that we don't know. And if you look at all the information we need to make an intelligent decision about, or an intelligent assessment, we don't have access to that information because, as I've told you many times, this is a military question. Who's got the biggest weapons, and how is the governance system working, and are they fighting or are they in accord? In terms of the, who's got the ability to deliver force and control. So we're living with maximum uncertainty. From what I see, and just making estimate or just wild guesses, it looks to me like the reserve currency has a lot more endurance. It could go another 5 years if the military works the right way. It could go another 10 years, and part of it depends on what the governance structure wants to do. Clearly, they want to reset and introduce a new currency and financial system. I think that's clearly where it's going, but it's all part of the governance system. You can't understand the financial system, Greg, without understanding the governance system. And so the governance issues are being worked out while digital currencies are being prototyped. So clearly we're headed into a new currency world, and it's part of, new control systems. But the answer is we don't know. And my fear with many, many commentators is they're underestimating the power and endurance of the system. And I'm always getting yelled at because people think I'm pro-empire. I'm not saying I'm pro-empire or for the things that they're doing to keep it going, but the game has a lot more juice in it to keep it going if the leadership stays, sufficiently aligned and makes it happen.
You said that they could go 5 years or 5 months. I mean, there's a lot of talk about a new currency. I've gotten some emails from some of my sources that I do not interview with, and they say, "Wow, there's going to be a new currency. I think it's going to be a treasury-backed dollar or something like that." Been talked about a USN that they may have out, that they're never paying this. They're not even going to admit to the 21 trillion, let alone pay the additional 21 trillion. That's 42 trillion minimum if you add the official number to the missing money that you and Skidmore came up with and been talking about. So could we?
Yeah, but here's the thing, Greg. Even if they introduce a dollar backed by gold, it's going to start off with a small market share. They're very unlikely to do a big bang thing. These guys are prototypers. So if they do a treasury dollar backed by gold, they'll do a small thing, they'll play with it, they'll test it. Just watch Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies. These are all prototypes. These are all building, the technology and developing the technology and platform that they use to figure out what they're what the central banks are going to do. So I just think when you look at the size and the liquidity of the treasury market and the dollar, the problem with the dollar is it's dominant, but it's dangerous. There's nothing there to take over. And that's why what I watch really carefully is what are all the efforts by the Europeans, by the Russians, by the Chinese to build alternative systems. So the question is, how do you build global financial liquidity around SWIFT and around the dollar? And that's a lot harder and takes a lot longer to do. The problem is, if you look at the last 5 years, the Chinese, the Russians, and now the Europeans are doing it. And it's always small while they figure it out and test it and get it working. And then bam, it goes up the S curve.
So you don't think that we're gonna have a president's gonna come on Sunday night and say, "Hey y'all, don't panic, but we got a new currency."
I think the chances of that happening are small. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I don't see any indication that it's likely soon. I don't see any indication that it's likely soon.
What do you think about the political setup? I mean, that little weasel, Paul Ryan, I said on my show he would do everything he could to flip the House. He did it. They didn't fund the members. They had 36 empty seats, 90 days before election time. I mean, so he basically flipped it. And what do you think about the setup here in Washington now, with the House controlled by the Democrats and the Senate increased their lead with the Republicans and Donald Trump at the helm in the executive branch? What do you think of the setup now?
So the first thing I think is the midterm elections. The Republicans perform sort of at the average or a little bit better than the average. And the message from the midterm elections is Trump really is the president. You're not going to get rid of him. In other words, the Trump administration demonstrated much too popular support in the midterm elections, despite the Republican loss of the House. And they held the Senate. They're even up one. So I just think that all the Democrat theories of how they're going to get rid of Trump, failed. And the election in the midterm, or the message of the midterm is, it's what the Washington Post said. I hate to quote the Washington Post, but they said, Trump won the election.
Well, and he got rid of Corker, and he got rid of Flake. Of course, he got but he's got somebody less dangerous than Flake, I think, because of their inexperience. But he got rid of Corker. He got rid of, McCain's gone. He got rid of who else did he get rid of? He got rid of Nelson. I mean, he got rid of some people. He got rid of some Republicans that in the Senate that weren't really his buddies.
Right. But here's the interesting thing. What amazes me is if you look at what the Democrats are doing, they're continuing to promote basically what I would call the dinosaurs into leadership positions. And it's almost as though they expect a big global reset, because why would you bet the future on the party on same old, same old? So you had Andy Stein and Mark Penn in the Wall Street Journal last week with an editorial saying Hillary Clinton's going to run for president and win. And, it was a little bit like a Freddy Krueger or Nurse Ratched moment of, oh my God, here they come again. When are these guys going to learn? Or the idea that Maxine Waters is going to be a committee chairman, or, Nancy Pelosi is going to be in the leadership. So you've got the dinosaurs, being recycled once again. And that tells me, the Democratic Party is thinking very, very short run. It's not a good sign. And of course, if you look at the polls, what America wanted, I think one of the reasons you didn't see a blue wave is America wants something. They want progress on infrastructure. They want progress on healthcare. They want progress on immigration. They want bipartisan progress. They want transactions to happen and things to get done. They don't want more investigations and fighting. And to say that the Russian fix didn't work, I mean, I've never seen such a big, major political failure, because the Democratic Party bet the ranch on a false frame and it failed, and it's failed big, and they're still using it.
Well, they may go to jail for it if he declassifies all this stuff. I mean, that they used a phony document to try to take out a duly elected president, and they applied fraudulently for spy, wiretaps through the FISA courts. So I don't see how people don't go to jail over this.
The thing, the American people pay a great deal of money and a great deal of opportunity cost to fund a Congress to go do the business of running the government. And what we've managed to do, all of us together for the last 2 years, is make a complete fool of ourselves in front of the world.
Oh yeah.
That's what we've managed to do. And the reality is, as long as you can print money, you can run an unproductive operation. And this doesn't just apply to Congress. This applies to the whole country. As a country, we have permitted our economy and our culture to be debased by rich subsidy. There's a cost to living on subsidy. We have literally become a highly unproductive Soviet economy in many respects. And the reality is we've continued to behave that way for the last 2 years, and Congress has been the leader of that kind of bad behavior. It's really interesting. I don't know if you saw, Tucker Carlson gave a great speech out in San Francisco. He was doing his book tour. He's at the Independent Institute. And he said, people hate Trump because he names it. And he's right. The thing I like about Trump is he brings more transparency than any political leader in a long, long time. And everybody can't stand hearing it. Because, if you look at how far we've gotten away from fundamental productivity, it's very frightening. And nobody wants to hear it. And Trump keeps bringing it up.
Rob Kirby, Rob Kirby, you're friends with Rob Kirby. Rob Kirby is a very small universe of people that, ranges tonnage of gold and silver for people. I mean, I was a couple dozen people in the world to do that. I don't know, a dozen? I don't know. And he knows people all over the world, and he says, listen, the demand by the wealthy is an inordinate amount, billions and billions, tens of billions of dollars are waiting to go into precious metals, and they're having a hard time sourcing it. Why?
Right.
Why are the wealthy? You hold on. You travel all over the world. You give consultation to very wealthy people for very big dollars. You must have heard some of this stuff in your travels. You're all over the place. You're in Australia. You're in Europe. You're in Italy.
Right now, I stopped being an investment advisor to individuals. I'm just doing screens. So I just want to say that.
But still, you know a lot of people. Why is there big demand for gold behind the scenes?
There is, the question for most people is, where can we put our assets where, number one, our property rights will be respected, and number two, in a variety, because of the extraordinary uncertainty about understanding where the currency system or the financial system, the governance system is going to go, what are the assets that are going to hold value, including in the worst case? Now, the reality is, if you look at the different scenarios, different asset classes are going to perform differently in different kind of scenarios. But, my favorite quote about gold, always have enough gold to bribe the border guards. In the worst case, gold is a store of value because it is respected globally as a currency, or as money, when without the backing of a sovereign government. What's the global currency that has value without a sovereign government? Gold is one of the few, gold and silver. So it's one of the reasons I think most people, particularly wealthy people, feel that they need to have a store of value for the worst case. So it's central bank insurance. Your core position in precious metals is not an investment, Greg. It's because it has a negative cash flow. It's central bank insurance, and I think that's why everybody feels you have to have a position. Now, when gold was confiscated by the American government in the Great Depression, most households owned gold. Now, very few households own gold. And if you just imagine a lot of households in Europe and the United States and the developed world buying gold, it's a huge demand for gold. And I think we've continued to see for the last 15 years steadily people wanting to have a core position in precious metals for the worst case.
Well, you have this whole Deutsche Bank thing, which I've been beating the drum on because, according to the IMF, it's the most systemically dangerous bank in the world. And, people say, well, they're not going to let that go down. Okay. What about all the other banks? What about Italian bonds? What about Spanish banks? What about French banks? What
Well,
about
here's the big
what?
problem with the banks in Europe, because I believe a lot of those banks are utilities. They're basically government utilities, and the government's not going to let them go down. Remember
But how
when
much
our
money can they spend not letting the whole system go down? Obviously, a lot.
a lot.
Okay, go ahead. I'm
Never
interrupting.
underestimate their ability to, to covertly supply what is necessary to those who need subsidy. So I don't think they're going to let them go down, and I think they have the capacity. Certainly, the Germans have the capacity to not let things go down. But the reality, let me just step back and say, the problem the EU has is it's trying to operate a global currency that isn't backed by a military. And it's divided into two groups: Northern Europe, which has a very different growth rate than Southern Europe. Southern Europe would be much better off with its own currency or its own, basket of currencies. And so the problem for the EU is, do they get bigger? Do they get smaller? Do they break up, or do they reconfigure into a Northern alliance? I think there's a reasonably good chance you'll see the EU reconfigure into a Northern alliance that has more of a centralized military. But it's one of the reasons the euro can't really, at this point, compete with the dollar for reserve currency status.
Which is why Macron's been out saying we need an EU military. That's the real reason behind that. Is that right?
Well, if the EU came together and the UK was in the EU and they had a central military, then you're talking about a reserve. The euro could move up significantly in terms of market share for reserve currency status. I mean, that's why I keep telling you the dollar is dangerous and dominant, not because I like the empire, not because I like what it's doing, not because I like the dollar. But if you look at, okay, well, how are we going to move that much liquidity into something else? What's the something else? That's the challenge. You've got a game of musical chairs and there's no other chairs.
And they're afraid, and what the wealthy people are afraid, I'm just going to go back to gold here for a minute. They don't know how this is going to go down. So they want something with no central bank tie. They want something that is outside the system, basically. That's why there's this big. You talk to Egon von Grey.
Here's the problem: you can't get outside the system. Even with precious metals, you can't get outside the system because you need a custodian. So either you're the custodian and you have enough guns to defend your gold, or you found a custodian that you can trust. But there's always scenarios where I can prove to you why you can't trust that custodian, and that's why you really have to be balanced in terms of jurisdictions and your take on what the worst case could look like.
What could the worst case? Wait, stop. What could the worst case look like? Let's just get that tar baby out in the room and wipe it off. What could the worst case look like?
The worst case could look like the following. Here's my worst case. The reason we globalized in such a radical and rapid way in the 90s with the World Trade Organization is because we wanted the human capacity of Asia to build a multiplanetary civilization. We needed 3 billion people with higher IQs than the Western world to, create massive amounts of engineers to radically up our game in terms of technology and capacity, because something is going on in this planet that leads people to believe in 100, 200 years the planet's going to die. And so our number one risk is there a geophysical risk on this planet? So, you've had Dane Whittington on who's talked about the global spraying. Why in the world are they doing global spraying that's basically making the whole planet toxic? Are they just doing it so they could do weather warfare? Are they doing it because they're trying to extend the life of the planet? I don't know the answer. But that's the one big question here. Why did we do a radical move to radically increase the speed at which we could become a multi-planetary civilization? What's the rush?
Are you thinking that the 21 trillion, we into woo-woo land, but the 21 trillion is funding a space program, which Trump, again, brought up. So we need a space force.
21 trillion is doing a lot of things. It's not just, it's like the joy of cooking. There are lots of recipes. So that's a lot of money. You're running a governance system and, you're running two civilizations out of one budget. Okay. So since World War II, you've had a covert system that's growing, and it's doing lots of different things. It's running the planet on a on a different governance system than what you think the official governance system is. So 21 trillion is, it's going to a lot of different places. There's no simple magic bullet here. But I definitely think part of it is going into space, because after Kennedy was assassinated, they basically, I believe, they took the space program dark, and it's continued, at least the funding, if not more. And to do that, you've had to build a whole world of underground bases. If you look at the underground bases and transportation systems they've built, it's pretty impressive. So we have been spending money on infrastructure in the United States. We just can't see it.
Yeah, high-speed rail, under the ground,
right,
for hundreds of thousands of miles. So your worst-case scenario is the planet dies? That's your worst-case scenario?
The worst-case scenario is we're dealing with very serious geophysical risks. So we know throughout history we've had, we believe we've had systems like the Noah and the flood, where basically civilization almost gotten wiped out.
Yeah.
So throughout the cycles of Earth that we know, we've had times in our past where we've had huge geophysical risks that almost wipe civilization out. And the question is there a reason? Because, I grew up in a whole world, and I watched the world go nuts in the beginning of the 90s. Radical changes of policies, radical changes, all designed to, to coalesce huge amounts of money under central control and do secret projects. Why? What's that about? And we like to sit around and say, oh, well, we hate the establishment and they're idiots, and, they're just being greedy and it's all for them. That's not true. That's not my experience with the establishment. There is a reason they're behaving this way, and I want to know what it is. And I don't know. I don't know, Greg, how the governance system on planet Earth is organized, and I don't know why they are shifting massive amounts of money out of the U.S. government and out of the U.S. economy and taking it dark. Now, I can give you lots of theories. I can teach you a lot about what I know about that. I know a lot about it, but I still don't understand what happened. So I'll give you a perfect example. If you read, Norm Berglund was a very top engineer in the space programs and the high-tech black budget programs in the United States. And he wrote a book called The Rings of Saturn, and he describes the Voyager in 1980 going by Saturn and seeing these huge plasma spaceships docked in the rings. Their theory was they were drawing energy out of the rings somehow. And what he describes, Greg, is exactly when all the mortgage fraud went nuts. And if you study a history of the mortgage fraud, which I have, I probably know more about mortgage fraud than anybody outside of the intelligence agencies, what you see is that you had to bust through massive system-wide internal controls at the central bank, in the federal government, at the Treasury, and in every one of 3,100 counties to engineer it off. And if you look at all the sort of, intelligence agencies and Masons and secret societies and Vatican and all the different groups and the banks and the law firm, they all went along. And the question is why? Why would they all go along in doing something that financially insane? And when you come back to it, it all started when they all got scared about whatever they saw, passing Saturn. It was the same time period. And so since World War II, we keep making these decisions to not disclose certain things and to keep things secrecy. And right now, we are choking on secrecy as a society. If you look at all the people who got it wrong about collapse, the reason they got it wrong is because all the information they needed to determine whether or not it was going to collapse was being kept secret, even though they as taxpayers were financing it. I did a great Solari report this year with Amy Benjamin, who used to work as an attorney at the Department of Justice, on the many pages of secrecy and how secrecy is engineered. And because you've studied it, a lot of the secrecy is engineered by turning classified government projects over to private corporations.
Yeah.
Who then don't have to report. They don't have to comply with the SEC. They're making massive amounts of money. And, it's part of what's keeping the stock market so high and people not understanding what's keeping the stock market high, because you have massive amounts of covert money pumping up earnings in these operations, pumping up earnings. I'll never forget, I just have to tell you a really cute story. we were having, as I travel around the world, we have these lunches for subscribers. So I'm in Amsterdam a couple years ago, and I walk into the restaurant, and there's a guy early who's flown over, actually lives in Switzerland now, but he used to trade in the city of London. So he's cute as a button. And I said, okay, what's your story? And he says, well, I'm a Salary Report subscriber. And because during the 90s, I could never figure out, why are the elevator company stocks and the mining company stocks going up? This doesn't make any sense. And then I started reading the Salary Report, and I realized, oh, they're not mining for metal. They're building the underground bases, and they need lots of elevators. It was really interesting. I used to have a friend in the oil patch in Texas who used to swear that Zapata Oil, which was the George H.W. Bush's company, made all its money drilling, missile silos out in the ocean for the ICBM missiles. So this has been a growing part of the economy, and you can't understand the U.S. stock market unless you understand those cash flows. Now, they're impossible to understand in the way we like to understand, because you've got to guess and estimate, but a guesstimation of all those cash flows and the intersection between Wall Street and Washington on the covert side is absolutely essential if you're going to understand what's going on.
One thing's for sure, it wouldn't help out, common folk like me, or most of the useless eaters of we the people. It wouldn't help out that. I mean, they're going to help themselves, right? That's why they're going to keep all this for themselves. When the rubber really hits the road, they can't save everyone, but they'll save their own tails, right?
Well, I just want to emphasize, my red button story. And if anybody's interested, you can look it up on the internet. I've got a video called the red button story. But the general population, Greg, is much more complicit in this than we like to pretend. So we all want the story of I am good. I want my check, and I want the story of why I'm good, and I don't want to know what's really going on under the carpet. So I have to tell you my experience, the general population is much more complicit than we want to admit. And we're not going to get out of this thing if we start off.
Hold on just a minute. No, if they were complicit, then they would know all the facts, and they wouldn't be all this secrecy. There would not be all this secrecy if everybody was totally complicit. They are around the edges, but if they would be totally complicit, they wouldn't be all this secrecy. And the secrecy is deep and big and huge, right? I mean, there wouldn't be all this secrecy.
Here's the thing. If you look at the mortgage fraud and the narcotics trafficking, it takes tremendous numbers of people who are in on the deal locally.
Yeah.
So the complicity for the nuts and bolts of mortgage fraud or government money fraud or narcotics trafficking or the money laundering, it's pretty deep and widespread, Greg, because I tried to bring transparency to the narcotics trafficking. And, I got my head handed to me, every year for 15 years straight in a row. And, the complicity is deep, and the financial dependency on the dirty money is very, very deep.
Okay, so I understand, but we just had Dr. Mark Skidmore, who's not a kook. He's a tenured professor, expert in public budgets,
exceptionally capable man,
PhD economics, had a team of people help him, discovered 21 trillion in just 2 departments. Do you know that story has yet to even come up in a question for the White House? Sarah Sanders, excuse me, that's a legitimate question. I mean, forget about Avenatti and Stormy and all this other stupid stuff, and all stupid Jim Acosta, another idiot.
All the people who are there work for corporations who the last thing they want is that coming up. So it's fake news.
But that's the problem. The problem is that this is a real number. That's
not the problem. The problem is, why is anybody watching that fake news?
Yes, I understand, but they have control.
So
the money.
If 10 million people stopped watching CNN and started watching USA Watchdog and the Salary Report, big change.
Oh yeah, well, the Salary Report anyway. I mean, every time you come on, I'm thinking, wow, I'm an idiot. Whew. No, I have a hard time. I have a hard time keeping up with you.
But I will say, where you're right is the secrecy. The cost of secrecy is enormous. Now, let me tell you why. when I built all the databases that I built in the 90s on, I took 3,100 counties in the United States and we mapped out the cash flows, and we had an estimation on the covert that we understood then. And we took a look at what would happen if we could just run the economy to make the pie as big as possible. What would happen if we let markets really happen and we stopped trying to, use the federal government to control the economy and do all this covert stuff? What would happen? Because the government money, the overt government money, has a terrible negative return on investment. What would happen if we managed the economy so that the government money could have a positive return on investment? We just had markets and tried to make the pie as big as possible. The wealth creation was so big, Greg, I didn't believe it. I had my smartest guy. He was in fact, he was Beijing. He'd been at Tiananmen Square and then ended up at MIT and got a PhD. So I had my absolute smartest guy on it, and he kept bringing the simulation numbers to me, and I kept saying, "You're wrong. It's too big. It's too big." And finally, he said, "Look, you've got to take time and look at this." So I just cleared my schedule, and I spent a couple days going through all of his simulations, and I realized, holy cow, the cost of tyranny, the cost of oppression, the cost of Americans having lousy education and, all this control, it destroys so much wealth. That's why I'm telling you, if we had transparency and we stopped with the secrecy, in fact, we could turn the red button green. We could make money pushing the red button, because you can't, ultimately you can't have a successful civilization with this kind of secrecy, this kind of, it's like a family. The stories of the men who have two families and one family's secret from the other, and he's trying to make it all work from one budget.
Charles Kuralt.
Right, and it gets so dysfunctional, and the lies get so dysfunctional that, the destruction of productivity and human capital is enormous. So, that's why my mantra has been transparency, transparency, transparency. But more important than anything, I love math. Transparency about the nuts and bolts of how the money works, one county at a time. Because if every one of us will just get together with our neighbors and clean up our county, it's really funny. I live in a highly segregated community in Tennessee. And when I first got there, I said, look, if you guys would just collaborate about the money, you could hate each other rich instead of hating each other poor. And no, I'm serious. If you look at how the money works in every one of 3,100 counties, it's called participatory budgeting. Start to take responsibility for how the money works and hit that red button in a way that turns it green. Small business can make a lot of money. Now, if you look at what the Trump administration is saying, and Mnuchin is saying, and Trump is saying, they're willing to give real power or greater power over the community banks and credit unions and local development. If that's the case, there's a lot of wealth that can be created on the Make America Great Again plan, but it's going to require bipartisan cooperation. And the reason that the divide and conquer gets pushed so much is that stops it. Because you need all three generations to realign, and you need people on all different sides of the political spectrum to just get down in the trenches and start saying, okay, how do we grow small business? How do we grow employment? How do we do it in a way that heals the environment and creates equity for the pension funds? It's all there to be done, but it requires cooperation. And that's why the divide and conquer is so strong, because you want to keep people away from working with each other or talking to each other. You want to close the mind. Our strength as a country, Greg, has always been we had an open mind. It's a free country. Let the guy say what he says. Let him think what he thinks. We had a way of disagreeing and still cooperating and working together. And that's why we've got to overcome the divide and conquer, because the opportunity is there. It's always been there.
I want to bring this up because you've already hit on some of this, and this is the rise of the Asian consumer. And some of this 21 trillion, of course, went to building up China and
right.
Asia, and it's really well done. I mean, you do this in a quarterly report. There's all kinds of charts and facts and figures, and I mean, you spent a lot of time on this. It's very well done.
Right. I spent more time on this than I've spent on any so far. And one is because if when I drive around America and talk to Americans, and Europe too, people don't understand. they've been investing in building something that's now about to go up the S curve, and they're going to get caught flat-footed. They don't understand what's about to happen in terms of the growth of Asia. Now, clearly, the current administration understands and is moving to do something about it. But, everyone in America is about to get hit by, or is being hit. It's happening now. We're being hit by a tsunami, and we need to understand it.
You're saying, you told me in the pre-interview that hey, the people coming across the border, that's not your biggest worry. Your biggest worry is China, correct? Why?
Well, there are 50 million Asians or 50 million Chinese who are living overseas. My prediction is what's about to happen. We're swinging, the national security state is swinging in big operations into the coasts. Eventually, it'll move into the heartland, but for now, I think the big move is into California and the East Coast. And it's coming in from Asia, and they're going to swing in tons of high IQ professionals.
China.
Yeah. So if you travel around America, the thing that's squeezing Americans the most is very high income investors and people moving in from Asia. It's both Indians, Chinese. It's across Asia. But you have people who've made a fortune on the rise of Asia, and they're moving into the United States. And you also have tremendous IT and other high tech talent. And it's being recruited to come in, and you'll see that grow significantly. And it's, you got real estate brokers up in Connecticut. They're all learning Mandarin. You've got the president's grandchildren are learning Mandarin. And so Asia is rising, and they've only begun to go up the S curve. So you're talking about incomes. If the average income in China, say, is 15,000, but is ultimately going to converge with the U.S. and the developed world, you're talking about an explosion in the middle class.
Yeah, you said in your book, and I can't get every fact and figure, but one of the ones that jumped out at me was that the middle class in China is 1.9 billion.
No, so the Chinese population is 1.3 billion.
Oh, I'm
1.4
sorry.
billion now.
I'm sorry, yeah. Okay.
And India's 1.3. India is expected to pass.
Okay.
But eventually by 2030, the current estimate, and there's some wild cards here, so AI and automation could change this. But they're expected to go to a middle class of over 3 billion by 2030 in 12 years.
Wow.
So you're talking about a middle class in Asia that's going to be 10 times the middle class in the U.S.
Wait. That's China and India.
All of Asia.
Oh, all of Asia. All of Asia. Indonesia, the whole deal. Okay.
Right. But for many decades, Greg, the American consumer was the center of the global economy, and now that mantle has passed.
One of the things you brought up was the movie. Go ahead. One of the things you brought up was the movie Crazy Rich Asians, which was funny and clever and lovely, but also instructional. But go ahead.
Right. Well, it's remarkable to see. There's a great, I don't know if I'm a Financial Times fan, but Financial Times just had a piece on the future of war that was excellent. And it quoted someone from the Pentagon as saying, while we've been sitting around in the Middle East worried about guys who lob homemade bobs from trunks, the Chinese have just blown by us. If you look at the investment in technology and the application of technology that's been made by China and Asia over the last 15 years, just high-speed trains, they've blown right by us. And the great thing about Crazy Rich Asians is you can see by taking a little tour. If you don't have time to go to Singapore, you can at least go to Singapore through the movies, and you can see the extraordinary achievements that have been made.
Yeah. Well, also too, but just to balance this out, of course, China just put in a dictator for life, Xi Jinping. There's no democracy there, which is what.
So I'm not saying I'd want to live in China, and in fact, I think the reason there was such an effort to bring the estate tax down is there's a tremendous effort to recruit, whether it's the wealthy families or the IT and technology experts. There's an incredible effort to recruit those people into the United States, and they want to come because it's a more attractive lifestyle, and there's a lot more freedom. So, absolutely. And that's one of the things that's happening because, the housing market is softening now, but so many people were finding themselves priced out of buying a home by, the Asians, the wealthy Asians moving in. And you'll see this not just in America, you'll see this all around the world. So you've got, and you can imagine if the wealth that has happened from going from, a per capita income in China from 5,000 to 15,000. Imagine what it's going to be like when it goes from 15,000 to 60,000.
Yeah, yeah. And what about the war card? There's, there's all these trade wars going on and trade talk, and Trump is trying to rebalance the global trade picture, try to get the United States from being, taken advantage of. Used as a piggy bank, his words. But what about the war card, the South China Sea, the whole deal like that?
Here's what's happened. When we started to invest in China in the early 90s and China developed, China basically financed America keeping a false prosperity going. So we built the manufacturing industry in China, or we basically made it possible by we buy treasuries, then we pay Chinese manufacturing companies to make stuff that Walmart then sells, and it deflated the value of labor and it deflated the cost of consumer products, and it basically kept the American consumer going for 10 to 15 years. The American consumer also financing it with a housing bubble. So we kept it going by liquidating our manufacturing infrastructure, a lot of it, and manufacturing. Basically what we did is we kept it going by dumbing down America, if you will, and liquidating a lot of our family net worth. So we liquidated the middle class in a way that kept their false prosperity going for some period of time. But it was very deflationary for labor. Now China is not interested in financing America. They're interested in financing their own growth and growth on the Silk Road. And that's not deflationary, that's inflationary, because now they're competing with us for resources and they're not financing, our continued gain. So they're rebalancing away from dependency on the United States, and the United States has put itself in a hole. And Trump's trying, to a certain extent, to dig the country out of the hole by moving manufacturing back. Now, what we managed to do, Greg, was we managed to move a lot of pollution to China. So China has some serious environmental problems because essentially we exported our pollution. Now with robotics and advances in material science and 3D printing, et cetera, we can move a lot of that back without having a lot of pollution. And so we're doing that. And of course, busting the unions. We busted the unions. So we're moving that back down, and that's all part of the rebalancing. What happens is anybody's guess. And part of the problem is...
Could there be war, though? Let's get back to the war question.
What China did was China took that manufacturing industry and is now making very big bets on building their military. And if you look at their plans for building their military and building liquidity globally, one, they're trying to build a currency that can function for a much higher percent of the market share of reserves and reserve currency. And they're trying to build a global military that will support that, including a global satellite system and a navy that can control the sea lanes in the South China Sea. Now, the U.S. started to build a reserve currency when it finally got control of the sea lanes in the Caribbean many centuries ago. And if China gets control of the sea lanes in the South China Sea, and they continue to build liquidity on the reserve currency, then you're talking about, potentially somebody that could really cut into the market share of the dollar. And so whether it's the building out of the Silk Road or controlling the sea lanes in the South China Sea, you're talking about serious competition. And so what Trump is saying is we're financing somebody who's now moving to take away our reserve currency status and our military supremacy, and we're basically financing that, and that's got to change and that's got to stop. And so what he's trying to do is to rebalance and give the reserve currency more strength and take some of that strength away from China. And that's why the squabble over the South China Sea, Mattis just, raised the heat on the South China Sea. That's why the squabble in the South China Sea is so important. And that's when Pence went out to the Asian meeting. He basically did one of those flybys on the islands in the South China Sea. So one of the hot spots to watch is going to be the South China Sea. So now China is no longer financing our false prosperity. China is now becoming a serious competitor on the global stage for reserve currency, for control of sea lanes, and for economic supremacy. One of the things that happened was we spent $7 trillion bogged down in the Middle East. And while we did it, they've built a tech juggernaut. They've been able to come up to speed on AI and tech much faster than we thought they could. And I don't know, if you go to Solera, you'll find a new review of the book AI Superpowers. But one of the reasons you hear the Trump administration continually talking about tech and who's the leader in tech, and Trump screaming at the tech companies and then talking about space, is because ultimately, if you look at the control points in the global economy, space and tech are going to be two of the most important ones.
But then why would there be? So maybe there's some truth to maybe having a dual currency. Maybe we have the Federal Reserve note domestically, and then maybe we have a trade dollar. Why wouldn't he try to, if he's going to build up the reserve currency, why wouldn't he have a gold-backed dollar with all the deep storage, the mining, whatever? I mean, is that something that may happen? I mean, because I keep hearing that they're going to have a new dollar, that we're going to have a...
I hate to say it, Greg, but
I don't know.
Right now, if you look at what's going on this week and last week in the U.S. economy, I would say all the symptoms are that the people who own the Federal Reserve are more powerful than they've ever been.
Wow.
So the question is, what is it that they're planning on doing, and what is it doing? I mean, I'm very disturbed by what's happening in California with the fires. And I'll give you a prediction. This is a guess, but it's, as Dr. Farrell says, it's a high octane speculation. One of the little known secrets about natural disasters is that it is a moment in time when the mortgage insurance funds of the U.S. government open up and money flows out in very secret, massive ways. Okay, so the U.S. Treasury and the financial operations of the U.S. government have wide latitude during a disaster to pour money out. And one of the things I believe is that every time you have a disaster, the mortgage fraud gets written down. So, for example, when I was the lead, not when I was FHA commissioner, but when I was the lead financial advisor, what we started to see was very disturbing patterns between areas where there was high mortgage fraud and fires. And it was almost as though fires were the moment in time when they could write down a lot of the mortgage fraud into the fund and pull out surplus. Okay, so as these funds are building up surplus, you have a fire, you write down the mortgage fraud, you get rid of the surplus. And so we started to see a lot of coincidence between money pouring out, and what looked to be very suspicious patterns of fire that just happened to be where mortgage fraud was. I've always talked about...
Wait, so your prediction is?
So my prediction on California is... I said a couple weeks ago on the Solera report, you watch, they're going to write down huge amounts of, the Fed. The Fed has $4 trillion, which I believe has a lot of the, kind of Wells Fargo funny stuff in it, mortgage fraud, and the banks. The banks and the New York Fed are going to write down some of this stuff as much as they can into, during these disasters, but certainly during the California fires.
Cleans up their books.
Sure. Yeah. Sure enough, last week the FHA came out and said, "Oh, we have a problem with appraisals. We're going to lose $14 billion." Yeah, that's just yeah. I mean, I don't believe that as far as I can. HUD's a whole nother discussion. We ought to do a whole show on HUD fraud, but I think they're going to write down a huge amount into these fires. Stick it to the FHA, probably stick it to the VA, some of the other funds. We saw Buffett start to buy banks last week. And, my guess is, what's that about? What's that about is with cleaner balance sheets, those banks are going to be stronger than they look.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Don't, and if you look at my guess as to what's going on in the shift of money and the cleaning up of balance sheets, what that says to me is the New York Fed and the Fed and the owners of the Fed are as powerful as ever.
Well, if there's a new currency, it would only help us by accident now, wouldn't it?
Well, here's the question: what do they want? I mean, we saw Lagarde at the, I think she was in Singapore, talking about the,
Cryptos?
yeah, talking about central banks doing cryptos. So, cryptos are like the most. If you think the dollar is an ugly fiat currency, wait do you see what central bank cryptos could look like?
Yeah. But you would be. But there's a reason why rich people are holding. I'm going to come back to that because we're talking about currency. There's a rich reason why people are holding gold. They're feeling a real need, a extra need on top of to have a hedge against central banks.
So here's what wealthy folks are doing. What wealthy folks are doing is they're buying land. I told you the land report, as of I think a year or two ago, since 2008, the top 100 landowners had doubled their holdings. So any land that can cover its maintenance costs and produce, they want land. They want a core position in precious metals. They want income producing real estate. So, and it's one of the reasons, our third quarter wrap up, I'll send you the hard copy as soon as it's done, is on megacities and the urbanization. And part of that, we have lists of all the real estate stocks. You've had an explosion, Greg, now in REITs and real estate stocks around the world. And there's a real push to get people out of ownership and into renting because income producing real estate is one way to produce yield in a world where yields are going down. And so they want money in income producing real estate. The best investment to me still are operating companies that do the business of the world and are very useful, that produce a cash flow, can produce a dividend. An operating company is, and most of them are sort of quiet and unsexy, but an operating company basically can turn 2 + 2 into 4. And and they do important things and they can produce a dividend. It's one of the reasons I love the railroads. I've always loved the railroads, because they carry stuff from here to there and they produce a dividend.
And they're efficient. Railroads are more efficient.
They're efficient. And so the question for the wealthy families is, where can we find operating companies that have the endurance to make it through this change? Because if you look at the changes happening in technology, we're about to go up an S curve and the changes are dramatic and a lot of companies aren't going to make it. There's a big shift. I call it the shift from global 2.0 to 3.0. So that shift is going to go on. And the question for most people is, where is the operating company that can lead through this shift and continually produce a dependable cash flow? I love precious metals, but it's got a negative cash flow. So, and it's one of the reasons why I would love to see local currencies using their gold and silver as local currencies, because then you could start to provide a lot more utility with precious metals.
I wonder if they will do that in the future. My prediction is at some point, I don't know if it's this president or another president going to say, take your silver eagles and your gold eagles, take it down, buy a car, buy a house, buy a business. You can use it. At some point, I think they're going to do that.
You got to get the states to take off the taxes. So, they've got to take off the sales tax off of gold and silver. So I live in Tennessee. We've been trying hard to get the sales tax taken off. And that's one of the things you have to do. I will tell you, if you want an explosion of wealth in America, the way you do it is you would allow local currencies to do, or local communities to do local currencies. Community currencies could create tremendous wealth in America, but they would definitely cut into the market share of the dollar.
The Federal Reserve notes.
Right. You couldn't use the dollar to drain communities. If they produce a dollar backed by gold, if they do treasuries with dollars, it's because people are moving out of cash. They don't trust cash. A U.S. Treasury note backed by gold is one way to get, is to stop the local currencies from happening, because then people will move their cash into that.
Okay. Well, listen, hey, I'm going to get on almost an hour. Very interesting. We didn't get as much of this as I thought, but you got a bunch of it in here. The rise, this is your second quarter?
So I'm just going to say this. It is absolutely important, if you live in the developed world, if you live in Europe and you live in the United States, you must understand the rise of the Asian consumer. This is a very big, deep money movement. It's going to have a profound impact on your life. And you need to look at it. You need to understand it. You need to think about it. And you need to understand how you are going to deal with it. Everybody's different. So there's no magic formula, but you need to understand what it's going to mean to your life, because it's a tsunami, Greg, and it's underway now.
Catherine Austin Fitts, she is the founder and creator of the Solari Report, also at solari.com. I will put all your links there. You can become a subscriber. You can also go on there. There's some free information there as well. Catherine Austin Fitts, thanks for the another hour of college education in the actual real world of business. Thank you, Professor Catherine Austin Fitts. Thank you for helping us.
Thank you, Greg. And my prayer for 2019 is at least half of the people wasting their time watching CNN and all those fake news shows, they should start watching USA Watchdog.
Thank you.
You can understand your world.
Yeah, well, they should go to Solari Report. That's why I have you on. I have you on because, not just because you're a friend of mine, you're a friend of mine. There's a lot of friends I wouldn't put on.
But you have a lot of great people on.
Well, you're smart.
You know something? No one is as smart as all of us, Greg. No one is as smart as all of us. And that's why what you're doing or what I'm doing, that's why it's so important. We need to have an ongoing conversation together. So, and that's how we're going to build the pathway through this. We can do this. We can build a pathway through this, but we can't do it, with fake stories, fake news, fake maps. We need to understand our world if we're going to succeed in it. So let's have a great year.
The truth will set you free. Catherine Austin Fitts, the Solari Report.
It will make you money.
It'll make you money too. Solari.com. That's where this publication is. There's an electronic version of it too. But you do this lovely glossy that you could take on a plane or a bus or in your car or whatever.
Right.
And so anyway, thank you so much, Catherine Austin Fitts, for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.